They say you should never corner a wounded animal. I learned that lesson the hard way, or rather, I taught it to them. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I went from being the family scapegoat to the nightmare they would never forget. The kitchen tiles were cold under my knees as I scrubbed the floor for the third time that week. It was barely 8 in the evening, and I could hear the laughter from the living room where my stepsister Madison and my stepmother Patricia were watching some reality show, their voices shrill with entertainment. My father, Richard, was in his recliner, probably nursing his 4th beer of the night. This was my life in Riverside, a small town in Ohio where everyone knew everyone, and nobody knew the truth about what happened behind the closed doors of 47 Maple Street. I was 16 when my mother died. Cancer, they said, as if that one word could explain the way my world crumbled into dust. My father remarried within a year, bringing Patricia and her daughter Madison into our home, or rather, what used to be our home. Patricia was all smiles and sweetness in public, the perfect grieving widow's replacement. But behind closed doors, she was something else entirely. Madison was worse. She was my age, 17 now, with the kind of beauty that came from expensive salons and her mother's credit card. She looked at me like I was something she had stepped in, an inconvenience that needed to be scraped off her designer shoes. The transformation was gradual at first. Little comments about how I dressed, suggestions that I should eat less, implications that I was lucky to have a roof over my head. My father, who had once called me his little sunshine, became distant, then cold, then cruel. Patricia had a way of twisting his arm, of making him see me through her eyes. Soon I was no longer his daughter. I was the help. I was the burden. I was, as they liked to remind me, the unwanted guest in their perfect family portrait. I remember the first time Madison threw a plate at me. We were in the dining room, and I had served dinner 2 minutes late because I had been helping Mrs. Henderson next door with her groceries. The play school became my only escape, but even that was tainted. Madison made sure everyone knew I was her weird stepsister, the charity case, the girl who wore the same 3 outfits on rotation because she could not afford anything else. She would whisper to her friends in the hallways, loud enough for me to hear, about how I smelled like bleach and desperation. The boys she flirted with would laugh, and I would keep my head down, my books clutched to my chest like armor. But that night, the night everything changed, started like any other evening in hell. I had just finished washing the dishes from dinner, a meal I had cooked but was not allowed to eat at the table. I ate my portion standing at the kitchen counter, cold spaghetti that tasted like cardboard. Madison swept into the kitchen, her phone in one hand, a dirty plate in the other. She dropped the plate into the sink I had just cleaned, splashing greasy water all over my shirt. "Clean it, freak! Did you really think you could rest?" Her voice was syrupy sweet, the tone she used when she wanted to twist the knife. She reached for the glass of orange juice I had just poured for myself, the only thing I had allowed myself that evening, and deliberately knocked it over. The juice spread across the counter and dripped onto the floor in sticky rivulets. "Oops, butterfingers! You better clean that up real good." I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood and reached for the paper towels. Madison laughed, that tinkling sound that everyone at school thought was so charming, and walked away, leaving me to mop up the mess. My hands were shaking as I cleaned, not from fear, but from something darker, something that had been growing inside me for months. Rage. Pure, undiluted rage. "What the hell is going on in there?" My father's voice boomed from the living room. Heavy footsteps approached and I felt my stomach drop. Richard appeared in the doorway, his face already red with irritation. He had been drinking, I could smell it on him. That sour beer smell mixed with the cologne Patricia had bought him. "Emma, what did you screw up now, you useless piece of trash?" He did not wait for an explanation. He never did. He grabbed my arm, his finger. The red dot of the camera glared at me like a malevolent eye. "This is perfect, Dad. Let her learn how real people behave." She was giggling, actually giggling as she filmed my humiliation. I stayed there, on the grass, tasting dirt mixed with my own tears, feeling something inside me crack and then shatter completely. I looked up at the sky, at the stars barely visible through the light pollution, and I felt it. A growl. Not from anyone else, but from deep within my own chest. It was low and primal and entirely mine. Animals do not stay chained forever, I thought. It is time to learn how to bite back. They thought they had broken me that night, in that cold backyard under the porch light that made everything ugly. But they were wrong. They had not broken me. They had created something else. They had created a monster, and this monster had a very long memory. After they let me back inside, laughing about teaching me a lesson, I went to my room. It was not really a room, more like a converted storage space in the basement with a mattress on the floor, and a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. But it was mine. The only space in that house where I could think clearly. I sat on that mattress and I made a decision. I was done being their victim. I was done being invisible. If they wanted to treat me like an animal, then I would show them exactly what a cornered animal could do. The next morning I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I watched Madison as she went through her morning routine, the way she obsessed over every detail of her appearance, how she checked her reflection in every surface she passed. I noticed how Patricia spent hours arranging and rearranging the living room furniture, how she would run her fingers over her precious antique vases and imported rugs, how she bragged to her book club friends about her impeccable taste. I observed my father in the garage, the way he treated his restored pickup truck like it was made of gold, how he organized his tools with almost religious precision. Everyone had something they loved, more than Madison was always running late, always rushing, and this small change would throw off her entire routine. The first morning it happened, I heard her screaming from the bathroom about how nothing was working right. Patricia blamed it on a power surge. I said nothing and smiled into my cereal. The jewelry was trickier. Madison had a collection of what she claimed were designer pieces, gifts from Patricia and my father. I knew most of them were knockoffs, expensive knockoffs, but knockoffs nonetheless. I started replacing them, piece by piece, with even cheaper versions I bought from a discount website. The differences were subtle. A slightly different shade of gold, a less perfect setting for the stones. But they were there. I wanted her to feel like something was off, like her perfect world was not quite as perfect as she thought. Patricia was easier in some ways, harder in others. She was obsessed with cleanliness, with perfection, with control. Her dishwasher had to produce spotless dishes. Her magazines had to be pristine. Her linens had to be perfectly organized. I learned that a tiny amount of flour in the dishwasher's filter would leave everything with a fine, cloudy residue. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to drive her crazy, trying to figure out what was wrong. She called the repairman 3 times. He found nothing wrong. She started questioning her own sanity. Her interior design magazines, the ones she collected in matching boxes in the study, were my next target. I took colored pencils, the washable kind that could be erased if you looked closely enough, and made small marks on random pages. A circle here, an underline there. Nothing too obvious, just enough to make her think she was losing her mind, that she had marked them herself and forgotten. I heard her on the phone with her therapist, talking about memory issues and stress. The socks in the linen closet were almost too easy. Patricia folded everything with military precision, and she kept her guest towels and table linens in perfect stacks. I started hiding things in those stacks. A dirty sock between 2 pressed tablecloths. A used tissue tucked between guest towels. Small things. I stuffed small pieces of paper towel into the vents. Not enough to block them completely, but enough to reduce airflow and make the system work inefficiently. He took it to 3 different mechanics. Nobody could figure out what was wrong. The temperature in Ohio that summer was brutal, and every time he got into his truck, I knew he was sweating and miserable. The garage door, I made sure to leave it slightly ajar on random nights. Not wide open, just unlocked. Just cracked enough that when he checked it in the morning, he would find it unsecured. It made him paranoid, made him question whether he was losing his touch, whether someone was targeting him. He installed new locks, a security camera. I simply stopped, letting him stew in his own paranoia. But I was careful. I was always careful. I never showed my hand. When Richard yelled at me about some imagined slight, I would respond quietly. Even animals know how to protect their territory, Dad. When Madison mocked my clothes or my hair or my existence, I would say softly, "That pretty shell of yours will rot from the inside eventually, Madison." They thought I was being weird, being dramatic. They had no idea I was declaring war. The weeks passed, and I watched as their perfect little world started to fray at the edges. Madison became obsessed with her appearance, constantly checking mirrors, convinced that something was wrong, even though she could not pinpoint what. Patricia's anxiety increased, her need for control spiraling as small things kept going inexplicably wrong. Richard became more irritable, more paranoid, jumping at shadows and questioning everything. And then came the party. Patricia decided to host a small gathering, an opportunity to show off their perfect home and their perfect family to the neighborhood. Madison invited her popular friends from school. Richard planned to watch the game with his buddies in the living room. The house was decorated within an inch of its life, every surface gleaming, every detail perfect. I was, of course, expected to serve and clean and be invisible. I had different plans. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Richard was in the living room with his beer and his sports and his loud opinions about everything. At 8 o'clock, Madison called out to me, her voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. "Emma, bring me some water. I am parched from all this talking." Her friends giggled, in on the joke of ordering around the help. I picked up a glass, filled it with water, and walked over to where she stood, her phone in one hand, her other hand gesturing dramatically as she told some story about her latest shopping trip. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw not my stepsister but a bully, a coward, someone who had made my life hell because she could, because it made her feel powerful. I looked at the glass of water in my hand, and then I looked at Patricia's prized orchid on the side table. The one she had paid $300 for. the one she watered with special filtered water and plant food. I walked past Madison and poured the entire glass of water directly into the orchid's pot, drenching it, overwatering it, killing it slowly from the roots. I am not your servant, Madison. And you are not a queen. You are just a girl with a pretty face and an ugly soul. The room went silent. Everyone was staring. Madison's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Patricia appeared from the kitchen, her face already red with anger. "What do you think you are doing?" Richard stood up from his recliner, his beer sloshing over the rim of his glass. "You little—" He started toward me, his face contorted with rage, his hand already raised. But I was ready. I had been ready for this moment for weeks. I stepped to the side as he lunged, and his momentum carried him forward. He stumbled, catching himself on the coffee table, knocking over drinks and making a mess. The room gasped. I stood tall, taller than I had stood in months, and I looked at him without fear. "You always taught me that animals need to learn how to behave, Dad. Well, tonight, I am going to show you what a wolf does when it is backed into a corner." I walked past him, past Patricia's shocked face, past Madison's tears, and I went to the living room, where Richard's pride— I walked to the china cabinet where Patricia kept her precious collection, the antique teacups and saucers she had inherited from her grandmother, the crystal vases she had bought on trips to Europe, the delicate figurines she dusted every single day. I did not smash them. That would have been too quick, too easy. Instead, I took out a small stone I had been carrying, a piece of rough granite I had found in the backyard, and I methodically scratched each piece, dragging the stone across the glaze, across the crystal, creating deep, ugly gouges that would never be repaired. "Your perfection, Patricia? It is just a shell, covering up something rotten underneath." She tried to stop me, grabbing at my arm, but I shrugged her off easily. I was stronger than they thought, stronger than I had ever been. Madison was crying now, real tears, not the fake ones she used to manipulate people. She had backed herself into a corner, literally, pressing herself against the wall like she was afraid of me. Good. She should be afraid. I walked over to her and she flinched. I did not hit her. I did not need to. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the broken eyeliner pencil I had ruined weeks ago, one of her expensive ones, and I threw it at her feet. "Your beauty, Madison? It is just a mask hiding how ugly you are inside. And from now on, every time you look in a mirror, you will remember this moment. You will remember that no amount of makeup can cover up who you really are." I stood in the center of that destroyed living room, surrounded by broken things and broken people. And I felt powerful. Not in a cruel way, not in the way they had wielded power over me, but in a way that came from finally standing up, finally saying no, finally refusing to be a victim anymore. "You called me an animal, Dad. You called me a stray, Patricia. You treated me like I was less than human, Madison. So tonight, the animal you created has torn apart everything you love most. You made this, and now you have to live with it." "They taught me that animals need to learn how to behave," I said, my voice clear and strong. "But they forgot that animals, when cornered, bite back. And my bite? My bite will leave scars in your minds forever." I walked out of that house and I did not run. I did not flee like a scared child. I walked like someone who had just won a war, who had just reclaimed something precious that had been stolen. I walked to the bus stop 3 blocks away, the one that would take me downtown to the Greyhound station. I had already bought my ticket online, already planned my route. I was going to Chicago, a city big enough to get lost in, to start over in, to become someone new. The bus was nearly empty at this hour. I took a seat near the back and pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching Riverside disappear behind me. I thought about my mother, about how she would have been so proud of me for finally standing up for myself. I thought about the years I had wasted trying to please people who would never be pleased, trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. I arrived in Chicago at 3 a.m. The bus station was grimy and filled with people who had nowhere else to go. But to me, it looked like freedom. I checked into a youth hostel, a place that asked no questions as long as you had $20 for the night. I lay in a narrow bunk bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside, sirens and traffic and life. And I felt something I had not felt in years. Hope. The next few weeks were hard. I found a job washing dishes at a diner on the South Side, a place called Mabel's that served breakfast all day and never closed. The owner, Mabel herself, was a woman in her 60s with tired eyes and a kind heart. She did not ask about my past, did not question why a 17-year-old girl was living alone in a hostel and working full-time. She just gave me a job and paid me in cash at the end of every shift. I saved every penny I could. I moved from the hostel to a tiny studio apartment I shared with 2 other girls, both of them runaways like me. I wondered if Richard had replaced his television, if Patricia had managed to repair her precious collection, if Madison had gone to therapy to deal with the trauma of seeing her stepsister snap. I wondered if they ever thought about me, if they ever felt guilty, if they ever realized what they had done. But then I would remember that night, the feeling of finally fighting back, and I would smile. Because the truth was, they had not destroyed me. They had tried, with every cruel word and every humiliating moment and every reminder that I was worthless. But they had failed. Instead, they had forged me into something stronger, something that could not be broken again. I got a better job after 6 months, working as a receptionist at a community center. It was not glamorous, but it was a step up, and it came with benefits, with stability, with the possibility of a future. I started taking classes at a community college, studying social work, thinking that maybe I could help other kids like me. Kids who were trapped in bad situations and did not know how to get out. 2 years passed, then 3. I moved into my own apartment, a tiny 1-bedroom in a building that had seen better days, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every dish, every book on my shelf was something I had chosen, something I had paid for with my own money. I planted herbs on my windowsill, bought a comfortable chair from a thrift store, hung pictures on the walls. I built a life that was mine and nobody else's. I was sitting in a coffee shop one Saturday morning, a place called The Grind on Lincoln Avenue, sipping a latte and reading a book for one of my classes, when I saw her. Madison. She looked different, older, harder somehow. Her hair was still perfect, her clothes still expensive, but there was something in her eyes, a wariness that had not been there before. She was with a group of friends, laughing too loud, trying too hard. She did not see me. I made sure of that, angling my body away, hiding behind my coffee cup and my book. I watched her for a few minutes, studying her, like I used to study her. I still flinched when someone raised their voice. I still had nightmares about being back in that house, about being helpless again. But I had also learned that scars were proof of survival, proof that you had been through something terrible and come out the other side. I graduated from community college with honors, got accepted into a 4-year university with a full scholarship. I started volunteering at a shelter for teens experiencing homelessness, helping kids who reminded me of myself find resources, find hope, find a way forward. Every time I helped someone escape a bad situation, I felt like I was healing a little bit more of the girl I used to be. 5 years after I left Riverside, I got a message on Facebook from someone I did not recognize. It was from a cousin I barely remembered, someone from my mother's side of the family who I had lost touch with after she died. The message was short, almost clinical. Richard and Patricia had divorced. The house had been sold. Madison had dropped out of college and moved back in with Patricia. My father was living in a trailer park outside of town, his truck repossessed, his tools sold to pay off debts. I read the message 3 times, trying to feel something. Satisfaction, maybe. Vindication. But all I felt was a distant kind of sadness, the way you might feel reading about strangers in the newspaper who had fallen on hard times. They were not my family anymore. They had not been my family for a long time. I deleted the message and went on with my day. That night, I sat in my apartment, the one I had worked so hard for, and I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about the girl I had been, desperate for love, willing to endure anything for a scrap of approval. I thought about the night I had finally snapped, the moment I had become something they could not control. And I thought about the woman I was now, strong and independent and free. I had learned a lot of lessons from that family. I had learned that not all people who are supposed to love you actually will. I had learned that sometimes the only person who can save you is yourself. I had learned that healing is not linear, I wrote about the night I fought back, but I also wrote about the years of healing that came after. I wrote about Mabel and the diner, and the kindness of strangers. I wrote about Jasmine and my other roommate, teaching me that family was not always blood, that sometimes the people you chose loved you better than the people you were born to. I wrote about the therapist I started seeing in my 3rd year in Chicago, the one who helped me untangle all the knots in my head, who taught me that I was not responsible for their cruelty. The story ended not with revenge, but with a quiet morning in a coffee shop, with sunlight streaming through the windows and a book in my hand, and the knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. It ended with hope. They thought they had taken everything from me that night in the backyard when they threw me out like garbage. But they were wrong. They had only taken away the old version of myself, the girl who was too afraid to fight back, too desperate for approval to see her own worth. And in her place, I had become someone new, someone who knew her value, someone who refused to be a victim, someone who understood that the wolf's bite had not been about hurting them, but about setting myself free. I finished writing as the sun came up, painting my apartment in shades of gold and pink. I saved the document, backed it up, and then I closed my laptop. Somewhere in Ohio, my father was probably waking up in his trailer, facing another day of consequences. Patricia was probably trying to maintain her facade of perfection with even less to work with. Madison was probably looking in the mirror, still searching for something she would never find, because she was looking in the wrong place. And I was here, in Chicago, in my own apartment, living my own life, free from their poison. I had survived. I had thrived. I had become the person my mother would have been proud of. I made myself breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it at my little kitchen table while reading the news on my phone. It not by destroying them, but by building something they could never touch, a life that was entirely mine. The wolf's bite had set me free, and I would never be caged again.